Simone Fontecchio and Omer Yurtseven lead the Utah Jazz to two impressive wins over the New Orleans Pelicans after they looked dreadful in Portland and LA. Why, of course, it's the NBA. Next on Locked on Jazz. Ba-dum-bum-bum-bum-bum-bum-bum-bum-bum.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. Today, we look at the Jazz impressive win last night and their two impressive wins with a bunch of different notes on really against a Pelican team that was red hot. Simone Fontecchio and Omer Yurtseven seem to have been the answer for the Jazz in the starting lineup. What? And I don't know how it lasts with Larry Marketing coming back, so we'll look at that. And we're about game 18, 19, 20. So we'll take a little status check of where the NBA sits today as well in our third segment. Bunch of different things to talk about. Keyonte had a career high. We'll touch on all of those as we continue. As I mentioned, I am David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked on Jazz. It's your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you for making Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free. We're available on all podcasting apps, including YouTube, where the conversation continues. And feel free to throw me a tweet at DLock09. So if you don't want you to feel left out of the conversation, I check those occasionally. I'm not on it. I'm not on it like Ron Boone is, evidently. Lacey came by our broadcast site yesterday, and Lacey had done something, and I hadn't seen it yet. And Ron Boone, I saw that. So Ron Boone seems to be much more active on X than I am. Thank you very much for anybody who leaves a 5-star review on any of the platforms. And please, if you're on YouTube, hit subscribe and then hit the little bell button because it'll tell you every single time we premiere. Shout out to, it looks like Jose, who said, I've been listening to Locked on Jazz since 2011. Definitely a must listen for Jazz fans. David's insight's amazing. Puts in a lot of effort, energy, passion for the Jazz. Thank you very much for that review on iTunes. All right. And thank you to the everydayers that are out there that join us each and every day here on Locked on Jazz. Well, that was impressive. You can kind of go look at the first one and say, they're without CJ McCollum, they're without Trey Murphy, they're without Zion Williamson, and they really just have these gaps of times when Ingram and Zion and CJ are all off the floor when they really can't score, and they're just too thin. And you can look at it, say that the Pelicans were on a back end of a back-to-back, and on Saturday, and the Jazz were without Jordan and Lowry, but the back end of a back-to-back on that LA back-to-back is a big deal. Not much you can say about last night. All you can say about last night is the Pelicans had come into Salt Lake City having won 5 of 6. They had beat Dallas, Denver, Sacramento twice, and the Clippers. They were rolling. They had won those 5 games by a combined 77 points. And I don't know for the nightlife of a Sunday night in Salt Lake. Okay, probably not. But the Jazz took control of that game last night and really did everything really, really impressively. One, they took control of the game. That's wildly important for us so far this year, of whether we play from ahead or behind. The win on Saturday night was the first night time all year in which we trailed either at halftime or going into the fourth quarter in which we won a game. So we are 1-11 when we trail going into the third. We're 1-10 when we trailed half. So last night we played from ahead. That was huge. Then the third quarter was incredible. The third quarter itself had 16 lead changes. Well, that's hard. That means every time you're making an inroad, they're making an inroad, they're answering back and forth. That takes some real resiliency that, frankly, we hadn't seen a lot. When I asked Will Hardy last night before the game, what were some of the things he was most pleased with in regards to Saturday? I actually asked him what they showed in film. One of the things he talked about was the fact that on Saturday's win, when things didn't go right early, they were executing the process of doing things right. The ball wasn't going in. They stayed with it. And they didn't then go rogue and go, I'm going to go one-on-one, do something like that. The Jazz had like a 4-play sequence where they went rogue last night. Talon pulled for an off-the-bounce 3 in transition, and then they kind of led to a bad defensive possession, which led to it was just a bad sequence of plays all of a sudden. And that's just not a smart, like Talen's developing and doing all sorts of things well, but Talen pull up threes is 5 of 22 on the season coming into the game. Like, that's just not a shot he should be taking on a pull up 3 in transition. Like, at some point you got to know yourself. Like, if you have to take that, that's fine. But Talen's done a nice job being up to about 36% on his catch and shoot threes. It's not because of his off the bounce game. So it was just like there was a tiny little sequence where we lost our bearings, but then we pulled it back together. It was pretty great. So, and then in the fourth quarter, they're not great in fourth quarters actually this year. They're the 27th ranked team with an 88 offensive rating in the clutch. They get very stagnant. They run some good horn stuff and creative things, but it's not where Zion and Ingram look at their best. And the Jazz took advantage of that. And then the Jazz did really what Will Hardy always wants them to do, which is he got the ball out of the hands of Ingram and Zion. Zion did not take a shot in the final 5 minutes. He was in close the game. And Ingram was not in the game. Ingram took a few because he's Brandon Ingram, but then Herb Jones hit a monster 3. He's not a great shooter. And then Herb Jones missed a monster 3. And then Marshall had to take another shot. You had broken their rhythm a little bit. So just a really impressive, resilient win and a really impressive sweep. It's interesting. The Jazz did the same thing to the Pelicans last year in December and kind of derailed their season. And then add in the fact you're doing it without Lowry. They're without CJ, fine. But we're without Lowry, which is really how this team's been built. And is our one, we've talked about this a lot, our one top 100 player on the roster, and everybody else stepped up. It's a sign of how good NBA players are. But that was really impressive. And then you kind of dig in another level about last night that was even more impressive was we didn't do it in our usual fashion. So what we've been doing this year is our offensive rebounding is incredible and have had such a huge edge on teams with offensive rebounding. And, frankly, that wasn't really what happened last night. We didn't have our 30% offensive rebounding numbers the way we so often do. Yurtseven did a nice job in the glass, and Walker had a good game, and those two really combined to be really solid, valuable pieces of a formidable defensive line last night. But the offensive rebounding number for us was, I think, at 26%, which puts us right in the middle of league average. There's nothing about our offensive rebounding game that has been league average this year. In fact, we've survived days because of offensive rebounding. So we didn't do it in our traditional fashion. We had a huge edge behind the three-point line, which if you play the Pelicans, you have to have. The Pelicans I think they're 28th in the league in defending the three, and they're 28th or 29th. They allow the second or third most amount of threes, and they take the second or third fewest. So it's a real math problem for them on a nightly basis. One of the other things that's happened here that's interesting is we're suddenly throwing passes. So it was we didn't talk about it a lot, but when Keyonte moved in, something happened when Keyonte moved in the starting lineup that we stopped passing the basketball. I don't know if it's Keyonte plays slower, and so we were coming up a little bit later in possessions if everyone just was playing off Keyonte. But all of a sudden, we're throwing 270 passes a game. Now, let me say this about passes. It's a funny stat. And I have yet to really find any correlation between passes and good offense. Obviously, the Warriors pass it a lot, but one of the best offensive teams of all time was the Houston Rockets, and they passed it almost none. And so I think that you can get a little kind of overblown on this. But this was noticeable. When Keyonte became our starting point guard, we went to 25th in the NBA in passes, to 270 passes a game, and had some really low number passing games. Like, we opened the year, we had 310 against Phoenix, and we had 326 against Memphis, and 320 against Orlando, and 320 against Minnesota. I mean, some of those are not very good days. And then Keyonte comes in and starts, and against Indiana, we throw 270, and Memphis, we throw 270, and then all of a sudden against Portland, we threw 249, and then against Phoenix, we dropped down to 228, and then in our next game against Phoenix, we threw 100 more passes than we did in the previous game, which was really weird. And then we go to Lakers and throw 262 passes. It's ugly. And we play Portland, and we throw 287 passes. It's not great at this point. Well, the last two games against New Orleans, and this is a little bit of the way they play defense, they overshift and they yield you to do this. We threw 325 passes in the first matchup, and we threw 310 passes last night. So when Keyonte came into the starting lineup, we dropped to 25th in the NBA in passes to 270 a game. In the last two games, we threw 325 and 310. For a team in which the head coach just said, if you don't pass and you don't play hard, you don't get to play. That's a pretty important number. That's a pretty important number. So those, I mean, I'm sitting here today as impressed by the Utah Jazz team as I have been all year. Simone Fontecchio and Omer Yurtseven were a large part of that. And we'll get to that. I've also got a few other notes on attacking Zion, Walker's defense. Keyonte showed some real growth last night. And then Fontecchio and Yurtseven were both terrific. So we'll get to all of those things. We're just getting started here on today's edition of Locked On Jazz. Today's show is brought to you by Murdoch Hyundai, located at 4646 South State Street and in Linden and in Logan. I got to see Blake and Ben last night, which I really like. It makes me happy. Blake had his son with him, was just a super dude. And then had one of his car guy is Mr. Johnson was with him, not the Olympian, but similarly named. And then I got to see Ben Murdoch later in the day, so that was great. Anyway, a side note for me, that was personally, I just enjoy them. I think they're good people, and it's an easy and pleasure for me to endorse them in that sense. Murdoch Hyundai, located 4646 South State Street, also in Linden and Logan. If you're going to stop by, please let me give you the VIP meeting there at Murdoch Hyundai. They've got the great lineup of cars. The Kona is just super awesome and been revitalized. That's the smallest of the SUVs, and the biggest is the Palisade. It's completely beautiful. The electric cars, the Ioniq and the Ioniq 5 and the Ioniq 6 are on fire and absolutely marvelous cars in every way. It's all over at Murdoch Hyundai, located at 4646 South State Street over in Linden and in Logan. So please feel free to stop by and join and see over at Murdoch Hyundai. Today's show is also brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel.com/lockedon gets you started on your way to a great deal of fun and a great deal of bonus bets for you over at FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. It's the official sports book of Locked On. It's FanDuel. Here's the deal. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So in other words, if you took the Jazz last night, despite the fact they were a dog, you would have gotten $150 in bonus bets. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get on the action. The app's easy to use, a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. The FanDuel Sportsbook is up and rolling for you tonight. I think this is the final set of in-season tournament games tonight and should be a great deal of fun and some big ones if I'm right. I think Minnesota plays Oklahoma City Minnesota's favored by 3, and then Sacramento and Golden State play a big in-season tournament game. Sacramento favored by 1. Dallas and Houston, if Houston wins that one, I think Houston wins their grouping. Dallas is a 4.5-point favorite. So 3 monster games in the in-season tournament coming up for you tonight. It's all at FanDuel.com, FanDuel.com/lockedon. So let's get to Simone Fontecchio and Omer Yurtseven because they were both truly terrific for the Utah Jazz in their performances last. Let's start with Simone. So Will Hardy literally said, hey, I want to give Simone the start against Brandon Ingram and against that length to see what his length can do. He's rather than Ochai. He says, our instinct is that we go to Ochai in those circumstances. He said, but he said, hey, Ochai busts and it butts his butt, but he's still 6'4". And there's just certain limitations at 6'4" against the 6'8" Brandon Ingram. So let's see what he does. Well, he got the assignment on Brandon Ingram. And on Saturday, Fontecchio did a pretty good job. Brandon Ingram shot 1 of 8 when guarded by Simone Fontecchio. Fontecchio guarded him for 35 possessions, or 46% of the time, 71% of the time they were both on the floor. And Brandon Ingram went 1 of 8. Well, now you got a bona fide scorer in Brandon Ingram coming back, having gone 1 of 8 against Simone Fontecchio in the first matchup. You know he's going to adjust. Well, the Jazz held with that matchup. Simone was on the floor with Brandon Ingram. He guarded Brandon Ingram 60% of the time again last night. And Ingram, again, you're dealing with one of the best scorers in the NBA, so they're going to adjust. Well, again, it was 60% of the time they were on the court, and they were both on the floor at the same time, and Brandon Ingram went 4 for 11. Brandon Ingram shot 5 of 19 in 2 games when being guarded by Simone Fontecchio, and maybe most impressively, Fontecchio did not foul him a single time last night. Brandon Ingram is not going to kill you if you don't foul him. Like, if you can keep Brandon Ingram in the mid-range, fading away from the basket, he's not going to kill you. And that's what Simone did. Ingram went 4 of 11, 0 of 1 from 3, did not take a free throw, was not fouled when guarded by Simone Fontecchio last night. Pretty impressive. I don't know that I think I'm ready to give you that Simone Fontecchio is a defensive stopper the Jazz have been looking for. But I will go with that. What we learned is that his length is more impactful than we thought. His effort and his fight is better, is important because he really does do both those things. He got through screens and navigated screens at a higher level than I probably anticipated. And his feet are really good. He's much more athletic than I think he is stereotypically thought of. And so he's able to stay with. So now Ingram runs shorter routes, a lot of pin downs, a lot of fight, those kind of things. Maybe just a good matchup. Players are different in different circumstances, but those numbers are telling. 5 of 19 in the 2 matchups. And I thought the one that was most interesting, the fact that he's 4 of 11 last night. After Simone, I would have given Ingram the edge. Okay, who is this guy the first time? I'm not used to him. Simone, his post-game interview with me on Saturday night, mentioned that he had guarded Ingram in FIBA. And so he was able to take some of that with him into this matchup, that he understood how to play him and how to deal with him and things of that nature. So I thought that was an interesting insight from Simone about this matchup. Simone's three-point shooting also really matters. Like, he can just get it off. He comes around those picks. He can get the 3 off. He's playing much more comfortably. And let's go back to a story that he told us in the offseason that I don't think many of us were aware about Simone, which is that Simone last year, first of all, it is well known that the adjustment for a European player coming to the U.S. often takes a year. So last year, Simone moves from Italy to the United States for the first time with a young child, with his wife who doesn't speak a lot of English, and he's trying to navigate this world. It's nothing about that's easy. Not going to the grocery store is not easy. Figuring out where you're getting your car registered is not easy. What am I doing with my child? How am I getting help for my wife? I'm on the road all the time. She doesn't have friends. Is she comfortable driving? All of these things. Imagine moving your family to Italy with your husband traveling or being out 65% of the time. None of that's easy. The other, so that's the first part. And that's why European players usually, you judge them based on their second year. And Simone is showing to be a totally different player in his second year. The other thing here is, if you actually go back and look at Simone's season last year, going in, he has that big game against the Warriors. He has 18 points. He's actually playing pretty well. He gets an ankle injury that game and doesn't play for about the next 5, then comes back and probably comes back too early and goes 2 of 13 shooting in his next 5 games, 1 of 10 from 3. Prior to that moment, and again, it's only 19 or 16 games, Simone is shooting 42% for the field. He's shooting 42% from 3. Simone gets hurt in that Warrior game. He finishes out the Warrior game, sits out for a while, comes back, as I just talked about, goes 1 of 10. He then sits out again, and he kind of fights it for the rest of the season, plays with his opportunity, and he ends up shooting 36% and 31% from 3 for the rest of the year. The end of the year, he basically can't function anymore and has the bone spur off the ankle removed, and said it was just a world of difference. Now, he wasn't particularly efficient for the Italian team in FIBA when he's the only offensive player, but you now suddenly look at what he's doing right now for the Jazz, 17 games into a season, which ironically enough is about the exact same amount of games he's played. I think 15 of the 17 in which he was last year against the Warriors against the Warriors when finally he got hurt and kind of may have derailed his season. But if you look at him right now, what is he doing so far in the season? One, his 3-point shooting is at 41%, which is exactly the same number it was last year at this point before the injury. His 2-point shooting's way up. His 2-point shooting's at 67%, and he's up at 47% overall. And so, that might just be understanding the league and growth. So this is really interesting to me because there's a bunch of factors here that lead you to believe that a lot of what Simone is doing is a really viable, reasonable thing. He didn't have a good on-floor camp, at least I think when a lot of us watched, but he had a very good camp for the team. And the coaches talked about that a great deal. So he's really been terrific. That's a great find. Omer Yurtseven against Jonas Valanciunas was particularly great. And that was the right matchup for him. I don't know whether this parlays night in and night out per se, but what does parlay in night out is that he plays hard, that he sets great screens, that he's incredibly physical, that he battles for boards, and that he does all the little things right, and he's super smart. He's a psychology major from Georgetown. In talking to him, he's really interesting and really bright, but he plays that way too. He understands the game. He understands where he fits inside the wheel, what spoke he's supposed to be. His spoke is not sticking out of the wheel. We've got a lot of spokes that stick out sometimes on this team. And I think that 22 minutes is just incredibly solid. Walker was great on the backside of it and allowed Walker to play matchups that were better for him. And Yurtseven will allow the Jazz to do this. Now, does that work against Rudy Gobert? We'll see. Does it work against whoever Memphis is starting at center with their infirmary of players that are out, Steven Adams and etc. If it was Steven Adams, it certainly would be a great thing. He's really, really strong. He plays really smart, and he plays, in the right fashion. And I think that's maybe the most important aspect of that. He's a good offensive rebounder. 19% offensive rebounding rate last night was valuable, but just his overall presence of size and physicality have given the Jazz something defensively the last 2 games that they just haven't had all season long. And then Walker was really good. The Pelicans shot 3 of 13 when Walker was the closest defender last night. Walker was really, really good last night. So, I think I don't want to dismiss what Walker's doing, but I thought Yurtseven just brought an element the last 2 games. It's going to be interesting to see what the Jazz do moving forward because Lowry moves into the starting lineup. It would seem logical that Yurtseven goes out of the starting lineup, but maybe you start Yurtseven and Lowry with Simone Fontecchio, Jordan Clarkson, and Keyonte George. Like that to me right now doesn't seem crazy. In fact, it might even be the right move, which seems amazing. But from the way guys have played and earned things, I would argue that those are the 5 that have earned their way on the floor right now on this roster. All right. Keyonte George did something really good last night other than just a career high and a monster dunk. We'll touch on that as well. And then we'll take an little NBA check on what's taking place in the standings and look at a little bit of the advanced metrics to see how everything looks and what looks. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is your daily leader in daily fantasy sports. It's super fun, easy to play. You're not going up against sharks or experts. You're actually just choosing more or less on 2 to 6 player stats projections, and then you watch the winnings roll in if you nail it. Plus, with basketball season here, there's a new picks combo projections, football and basketball, so you can do combo in special leagues. Also, you can do you have the reboot policy. Prize Picks offers reboot. If any of your players get hurt, they exit the game in the first half, do not return in the second. Your players rebooted, and Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with injury insurance policy. So, quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy app. And then I've got good news for you. 2 things for you. One is prizepicks.com/lockedonnba. So that's prizepicks.com/lockedonnba. If you use the code lockedonnba for your first deposit match up to $100. So that's cool. Second thing is Taco Tuesdays. Prize Picks offers weekly promotions like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Pick discounts player projections up to 25% to provide even more value. Today is Tuesday, by the way. So there you go. It's Taco Tuesday on Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonnba and use the code lockedonnba for your first deposit match up to $100 with Prize Picks. So what I thought I saw out of Keyonte, oh, by the way, Locked On has launched the first ever national 24/7 YouTube sports stream. It's called Locked On Sports Today. Go subscribe to it on YouTube and get ready. Throw it up on the television. Watch it in the background. You get the biggest sports stories, the local experts giving you all the stories of everything that's taking place, plus our national shows as well, covering all college, pro, everything else that you need 24/7. The Locked On Sports Today, first ever national YouTube stream. If you happen to be a Minnesota, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Dallas, or Cleveland sports fan, we have a 24/7 stream for local markets as well. In those markets, go check them out. Locked On Sports Atlanta, Dallas, Los Angeles, Minnesota, and Cleveland. All right. I thought Keyonte was really good in his second in the back-to-back games against an opponent, which I thought was neat to watch. The Jazz want him turning the corner more. He's coming off the pick and roll. And he's a little too passive holding, and they want him to turn the corner. And I think he watched film and saw where he could turn the corner. And I thought that was a really cool development for him. Like that he literally had this game, got to look at film, looked at it, and then he turned the corner with much more aggressiveness around the rim, finishing at the rim better than he has. His two-point shooting's really been poor. His three-point shooting's getting better. Obviously, the fast break dunk will get all the accolades, the 2 late threes, but overall, just how he ran the pick and roll, what he did in efficiency, from an efficiency standpoint last night, and some of those things are much better. His pick and roll efficiency has been really poor, which is fine. None of these things, like, that's just like, he's a rookie in the NBA. It's brutally hard. But I think he ranked close to last in the NBA in pick and roll efficiency since he's been in the starting lineup. And some of those passing numbers are because he's holding it a little longer. And we just saw a different guy and this is what's going to happen. He's going to develop and grow. But that looked great. And he seems to be kind of fighting through the difficulties and how hard it is to actually do some of those things in an NBA game. So I thought that was really great last night. I don't know if statistically it totally showed up last night. He ran, I think, about 7 pick and rolls with John Collins and about 6 with Omer. And I'm not sure that they were the plays by which he gets credit for the points. My quick scan of the stats actually showed the opposite, that his pick and roll efficiency last night was actually super poor. But I can tell you, just watching the game, he was much more aggressive, coming downhill, doing things that the coaching staff wants him to do. And you could see that he learned it from the night before. So you're seeing the growth. And eventually I think you'll see the outcomes the way you want to. For the time being, those outcomes are not quite there. All right. One thing I love to do is, as you guys know, is at this point of the season, let me just double check my notes for a second. I had a ton of notes last night. So let's review them really quickly. Pels came into Salt Lake rolling. Saturday was unreal. Fatigue was unusual, and fatigue tonight was without Lowry and impressive. Didn't have a regular offensive rebound. Third quarter lead changes. Defense in the fourth quarter clutch. 305 passes. Kessler 3 of 13 defending. Pels math problem. They don't shoot enough threes. We took more threes. We took advantage of that. Keyonte's development second team. Attacking Zion, I don't think I really got into. I just thought they did a really good job of attacking Zion when it was available to them without getting obsessed with it. Zion is one who you can attack. And I thought they did a good job with that. Fontecchio's defense, Omer's rebounding, Omer being super smart. 22 really solid minutes. I think I actually hit all of my notes today. All right. Just quickly, here are I like to do this week. You usually do this on, I don't know if we should do this on Mondays or Tuesdays, and then we'll do late game watch tomorrow. So here are the top, and then we usually look at it in 2 different ways. We look at the NBA stats and we look at cleaning the glass. NBA, and this year it feels like some of the NBA stats stuff, the cleaning the glass takes out blowout time. And it feels as though there's been so many blowouts right now that the NBA stats is maybe, and then we look at kind of the most recent trends. But here are the top 6 offensive teams in the NBA: Indiana, Philadelphia, Atlanta. I do not believe Quinn has that team as a top 10 offense. Dallas, Phoenix, Oklahoma City, and Milwaukee. And I cannot really believe that Oklahoma City is a top 10 offense either. So Milwaukee is 7. Top 10 defenses are Houston, Minnesota, Orlando, Boston, Clippers, Knicks, Thunder. Heat is at 8. Offenses that are scuffling: Portland is 30th, Memphis 29th, San Antonio 28, Detroit 27, Chicago 26, Lakers 25th defensively, Cleveland 24th. Pretty interesting. The worst defenses are Charlotte, Indiana, Washington, San Antonio, Utah, and Dallas. That's not a surprise. Atlanta's 24th. It's a little bit of a surprise. Overall net rating, this is for the whole season. Boston is number 1, tied with Philadelphia at 8.6. Oklahoma City's 8.3. Then a big drop to Minnesota at 6.4. Orlando is at 5.6, the fifth best differential in the NBA. Houston is at 5.1. Then Denver is at 4.6 overall. And now let's go to where we take out the blowout time and see if anything changes. Our best offense is Indiana, followed by Philly, Atlanta. Dallas is 4, Phoenix is 5, Oklahoma City is 6. Oklahoma City is the second best shooting team in the league right now. I just cannot believe that to be true. It's not what I projected at all. That's where I missed on them badly. Milwaukee 7, Brooklyn is 8 offensively. The teams struggling offensively are still the same. The defensive best teams in the NBA, if you take out blowout time, Houston's number 1, Orlando moves to 2, Minnesota at 3, Boston at 4, Clippers at 5, and Oklahoma City at 6. And your differential, Boston is 1 by a good margin, 2 Philadelphia, Oklahoma City at 3, Minnesota at 4, Houston at the 5th best differential in the NBA. 6 is Orlando, and 7 is Phoenix. Really, some of that's somewhat surprising. Here's the last 2 weeks. The number 1 differential team in the league is Oklahoma City, followed by Milwaukee, Orlando, Phoenix, New Orleans, and Houston. New Orleans came in on fire. Top offenses in the NBA, Phoenix, since Booker's come back, is running at a nearly 130. Incredible. Atlanta's number 2. Oklahoma City is 3. Milwaukee's 4. Brooklyn's 5. Indiana's 6. Defenses, Houston is number 1 over the last 2 weeks. Oklahoma City 2. Clippers have checked in defensively now, number 3. Orlando 4. And Oklahoma City, and New Orleans was 5 coming into this stretch. So very impressive work by the Jazz there to hold them up. All right, that is Locked On Jazz today. Thank you very much for tuning in. We will now send you over to our new 24/7 stream on Locked On Sports Today, the only 24/7 YouTube national stream. Everydayers, I appreciate you. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen.